Hello, my name is Shiva Devendran, and I'm the clinical lead occupational therapist for social care. And I've been a qualified OT since 2002, and I've been working with Cygnet for 13 years now.
Hello, I'm Catherine Gargett. I'm an occupational therapist along the South Coast. I've been an OT since 2000, working in various different fields: mental health, physical, learning disabilities, and I've been with Cygnet for 4 years, and this is my first time in social care.
Sheba, Catherine, you're the occupational therapists that are behind the chapter all about our social care service line. I know lots of other people have been involved in that as well, but Sheba has led on that. And Catherine, I know you've been a great support to Sheba as you've worked through that chapter. Can you talk to us a little bit and just explain what the role of an occupational therapist is within our social care service line?
So, within social care, it is an amazing opportunity to work for social care. We, as occupational therapists, we work in residents' home, and it is their home, and many of our residents stay there on a long-term basis. And working in social care, could be sort of, no 2 days are the same there. So one day you could obviously spend time with residents on the shop floor, doing more hands-on work with them. And then the other day could be where you have the opportunity to sit in the review meeting representing occupational therapy. And then you could obviously spend a day where you would complete documentation, you would complete reports and targets and preparing notes and completing your clinical case notes. So it is a very challenging and at the same time a very rewarding experience working in social care.
And just to add was about the OT process is exactly the same as in any other service line, any other role. Actually, the OT process is still exactly the same. You know, we work with people who are maybe coming into our services pre-admission, lots of work with the providers, the schools beforehand, and then working with them throughout the journey. And if they do leave our services, again making sure that transition is smooth. So it's not to be daunted. People shouldn't feel daunted. It's the OT process is still exactly the same.
So obviously every resident within those services will have a completely different set of goals, a different care plan, etc. But overall, what goals are we working towards within those services? How does that tend to look?
So, as how Catherine mentioned, we do have an OT process which starts right from the time they come into our service. And OT is valued, obviously, the occupational therapist work from the time of pre-admission right to the time they are discharged from the services. So it could be getting in, it could be liaising with the previous provider, and then attending pre-admission meetings. And then after they come to us, we have a process where we conduct observations with them, standardized assessments with them, and then, seeing that progress at each stage of their journey with us. And that is very rewarding for us. And coming back to your question, Emma, where we see the targets, what are the goals for the occupational therapist within social care? Our residents have got a diagnosis of autism, learning disabilities, and complex behavioral presentation, sometimes behaviors that might challenge us, not challenging for the residents. And then change can be really small within the progress what they make, but the small change and subtle change what we say could be really rewarding in terms of how we promote independence in their life skills. It could be a simple task of making breakfast for themselves, but then as occupational therapist, I think it's a very unique profession where you look into breaking down a bigger goal into a smaller chunks of activities. And I think we are really experts, occupational therapists, in doing activity analysis, modifying a task. The other big thing around goals for residents within our homes is adapting their environment. Because of their complex presentation, the diagnosis can have on their independence, it could have on their functional skills, it could have on their quality of life. Most of our work that we do, I'm sure Catherine would agree with me, it's around environment. Just making those little environmental changes where we could see that we have created a personalized space for them. For example, creating a calm space within their bedrooms or within the living environment could have a big change to their lives as such.
Yeah.
Do you want
And
to-
just to, what surprised me when I came into social care was that actually I can draw on my physical background and the mental health background. We actually encompass quite a lot of our skills holistically. And, I've had to do bathing assessments, stair assessments, falls assessments, assistive equipment assessments, and prescribe those. So it's quite it's very holistic, actually. You think, oh, it's learning disabilities and that's it. But actually, there it covers a whole range and real core OT skills. Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, it certainly sells it, doesn't it, to any kind of newly qualified occupational therapists that are thinking about where they might like to go next. It's a really nice starting point to go into that kind of service and be able to pull on that huge, broad range of skills and develop in so many different areas. It's a nice, well-rounded place to be, isn't it? When you think about working within that service line, what do you think the challenges are particular to that service line?
So I think change is inevitable, challenge is inevitable to any service line that you work for. Within social care, I think most of our residents, the autism services that we work at, has got residents who are non-speaking residents. So communication could be a challenge in terms of, you wouldn't be able to communicate with them verbally, but then they've got other modes of communication. So I think as occupational therapists, it is of paramount importance for us to build that rapport with the residents and understanding their style of communication. And having said that, working within social care, most of our services have got on-site clinical team where you have host of clinicians working with us. It could be speech and language therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists. Some of our services have got LD nurses. So we do lots of joint working. Collaborative working is key within social care, and we work with a speech and language therapist to help us with that communication. How do we adapt communication? If you if you think about our interventions, what we do, it's joint interventions that we do with them. It's group work that we do, one-to-one work that we do with our residents. So communication could be a challenge.
Yeah, our residents, but we it's just adapting, and that approach can change every day. Something might be triggering. It could be a time of year, it could be that they're seeing their family, it could be that they want chips for lunch and it's not on the menu. Everything changes day to day. So it keeps you on your toes, and you just change your approach all the time. Yeah.
So it's that flexibility and that working as a team,
Absolutely.
isn't it, that you need
absolutely.
to kind of get you through each day.
And the other important factor, I had already mentioned that they've got a diagnosis and as well as behaviors that might challenge. So behaviors could be a challenge as well working within social care. Because sometimes they display self-injurious behaviors, but that could be their form of communication. And then having said that, it's not that those small changes, but we could see changes, but it might take longer time for us to see that in real life. So the bigger change that we see in residents, and we have seen in our residents, is removing mechanical restraints. So someone who had been, on this mechanical restraint of wearing a helmet, and it took 10 years for us to work through that process. And now, it is a big success, just for the resident, and as well as for parents and for the OTs and for the whole service, to see them out of those mechanical restraints. So that could be, obviously I said small sort of steps of changes and subtle changes, but this is a bigger change and very obvious change that you can see in their presentation. So working with challenging behaviors could be a challenge for OTs, but then
Such
you
a
need
positive outcome there, though, isn't it? If you
It
look at
is.
the reduction in that restriction for that one particular person from working through
And
that
just
OT process.
de-escalating situations, you can see you can see something maybe starting to build, and it's about going in and supporting the support staff and obviously the resident as well, and just looking, instantly risk assessing that situation, looking at the environment, looking at the resident, that time of the day. Are they hungry? Are they thirsty? Is there anything we can do to try and, stop that situation escalating? And 9 times out of 10 we can. And, that is down not just occupational therapists, but, the whole team working together, getting to know the residents. That's the pleasure of working in our job, isn't it? To get to know our residents long term, and their families as well.
Which I think, it's the core of any OT role, isn't it? Building that rapport and those relationships with people. But particularly, with the client group we're talking about that you two are working with, it's nice that you've got that opportunity to work with people over a longer period of time and really get to know them as well as you do. Very different from working in, say, an acute service, isn't it? It's great that you've got that opportunity. So, as we said, we've been talking about the book. It's what we want to have more of a conversation about and give people a flavour of what's coming. Without any spoilers, I know there's a case study in your chapter. Can you just give us a few points of what that case study is about?
Absolutely. The case study is a lady on my caseload. She sprung to mind when I was asked to write a case study, because it just highlights the level of need that she has, and my role as an occupational therapist with her, that has encompassed everything really: physical, environmental, sensory. She's a lady with a really rare medical condition, and that sort of aging her quite quickly. So although she's young herself, we're involved in sort of thinking about falls and stairs and bathing and the physical environment, and how we can support her to reduce any risks and to live, a happy and good quality of life. So she loves gardening and shopping and going to the cafes and food related activities, and she's under a dole, so she is, she's unable to assess risks for herself. That's why she's in our residential services, and the doles is in place as a safety measure for her. So as an OT, I'm constantly assessing her. Every time I'm going in, I'm looking at her and seeing her presentation and getting a bit of a picture about what's going on. And, I've done, as I said, functional assessments, washing and dressing, cooking, cleaning, making her bed. She does, she needs quite a lot of support. She's one-to-one, has one-to-one support, but it's about empowering and teaching the support staff that actually she can do quite a bit for herself of those tasks. If you were to break them down, that actually she can do parts of the task herself, and we can then build on that, so she's able to live, as independently as possible.
So have you been working with the support staff in terms of grading some of those tasks and
Absolutely.
explaining to them how they can pull back
Absolutely.
to increase independence?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, she's she's somebody that's going to need support all the time, but it's about pulling away the support when it's not needed and when she is able to do. So it's about us empowering her to do as much as she can for herself. Yeah.
That sounds brilliant, Catherine. Can you tell us what the outcome was of that process.
Yeah, so working with this young lady, she just sort of pulling everything together. Obviously, the functional side of things as well, but thinking about self-care, productivity, and leisure. Obviously, the core of what we as occupational therapists do. She was really keen to go swimming, and she hasn't been swimming for a very long time, and I thought, do you know what, this is something I'm going to get her to do. She really wants to do it. Her family are really sort of keen for her to do it, and so I've enabled her to go swimming, which is amazing. But obviously, a very long process of the right pool, the right location, all the risk assessments, the staffing levels that's required, specialist swimwear. So as an OT, I've had to sort of think about all of the holistic things about getting her to the swimming pool and in the water. Through a bit of a period of time, I've been in the water with her. I was there for the first time, which was incredible. It really, from a job satisfaction point of view, you sort of step over into like, wow, this is amazing. And then, the second time I went, but I didn't go in the water, it's about empowering the support staff as well and getting their confidence up, and the activity coordinator as well. And then, I went a few times to support the staff rather than her, and just check that the process that we'd got down to a fine art was actually working.
So that's such a nice example, isn't it, when you think of the core of what we do as occupational therapists. Very early on, you've identified what's meaningful activity for her.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then worked with her and the people and the environment around her to enable her to engage in that. I mean,
and she goes weekly.
That's why
now.
we're here, isn't it?
Yeah, and she goes weekly. Now I don't have anything to do with the swimming, which is a shame because I've moved on to another person's sort of, needs and wants. But actually, it's so satisfying to work with the team to make sure that it happens for her. And, from a physical health benefits, she's lost a bit of weight. She's, probably her cardiac system's better. She's feeling better, and she just seems much brighter, and she actually said thank you after one of the trips as well. So she's obviously enjoying it. So as an OT, that's what I'm here for.
And for you as a clinician to achieve that outcome, how does that make you feel?
Oh, it's very satisfying, and it's just such a warm feeling, isn't it? You just feel like you're making a difference, and that's what I feel like I'm doing. So
Sheba, Catherine just touched there on some, I think, sensory strategies that you've been using. Obviously, I know that sensory integration is your huge passion in life. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how that fits in when you're working with these residents?
So, as part of the diagnosis, we know DSM-5 talks about sensory problems as one of the diagnostic criteria for people with autism spectrum disorder. So when that was released, I think the scope for occupational therapists to know about sensory integration was really huge. And it was the expectation that the OTs would know all about sensory integration. And I think we are very, very fortunate in Cygnet that we have a preceptorship program for occupational therapists. So for some of the services, based on the service demands and the needs of the residents that we have around sensory needs, the OTs are put on the preceptorship program even during they are in their probation period. It's just because the expectation for conduct observations and assessments to obviously meet the needs of our residents around their sensory needs. So I think sensory assessments is something, it's not only conducting observations and assessments, also giving that skills and knowledge for occupational therapists to the preceptorship program. And the preceptorship program has got a mentor who would support them through the journey of the program. And they would obviously help the occupational therapist to conduct those assessments and give them support in terms of doing an analysis of the assessment, interpretation of the assessment, and also to help with simple sensory strategies. We are not talking about sensory integration as such, because you need to have those formal qualification at every stage of when you can conduct an observation, at what stage you can conduct an analysis, And it's not pure sensory integration, but it's pure sensory strategies that we are obviously helping our OTs to have the skills and knowledge around that area.
The important bit there, Sheba, as you're saying, is it's never too early, is it, just to look at those sensory strategies, you know, right from day one of an occupational therapist coming into that service line. We can introduce sensory strategies as a concept, and those OTs can be supported by OTs with a greater knowledge or skill set around sensory integration and sensory strategies to be able to look at how they can best support those residents. I think, you know, within the service line, we do aim for people being formally sensory trained, don't we, over time, which fits so well within that service line. But as you say, right from day one, we can look at this as accessible for every one of our OTs, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And the thing which we need to understand is sometimes, because sensory integration is not part of the curriculum in the universities, that could be something that the OTs might feel really overwhelming about, just that term, sensory assessments. So it's not a scary one when you come into social care, because you get that support right from day one, like how you said, Emma. And then also, we are not, as I said before, it's not pure sensory integration, it's sensory based interventions. So that could be something like, if you just think about sensory diets were introduced for teachers, for teaching assistants, for parents, for carers. So it all starts with that sensory strategies, where it could be a simple tactile box that you go out for a resident, or just adapting the environment, just obviously having an inclusion of accessing sensory room as part of their activity timetable. So that is how simple it is. It is not a daunting intervention at all.
Just picking up on what you've said there, I think thinking about education for occupational therapists and what the degree programmes look like, should there be more sensory education within that programme, do you think? Is it something that should be part of
I think
the
it is
initial
such
training?
a powerful tool that an OT should have.
Absolutely.
So I know we do have quite a lot of assessments around MOHO. We do have around functional assessments. We look into, pots of tools that we have within occupational therapy. And I think in terms of sensory assessments and sensory integration, I think that should be part of their curriculum, to give OTs that basic skills and knowledge and understanding on what is that foundation.
And I think, just to follow on, I had until I came into social care, 18, nearly 20 years of OT, didn't know, apart from the 5 normal senses that we all get taught at school, that actually there's 3 more, and how powerful our senses are in all of us as human beings to function in our world. So I think it's totally blown my mind with how sensory we are as human beings, and the impact, and actually having not having your sensory needs not met is actually quite significant, whatever field you work in, isn't it? So yeah,
I think that's your next project then, Sheba, when you finish your masters, isn't it? Getting out there and changing the courses and what's available.
Yeah. I think we are really fortunate in Cygnet that we invest into people, into their training and career development. I myself completed, my postgraduate's, degree in sensory integration, working towards master's course in SI, is through what Cygnet had invested into me. So.
Yeah, and I'm about to embark on my level 1. So
Catherine is ready.
I'm at the beginning of the journey. Yeah. And I didn't think it was a pathway that I was actually that interested in, but actually now I've done my SIP program, the sensory integration preceptorship program through Cygnet. Yeah,
you can see it in practice.
You can
isn't
see
it? And
it.
See the
you can
difference
see
it makes.
it.
That you then become
and you can see
excited.
the tiny. I mean, there's tiny strategies that I put in place for my residents can actually make a huge difference, and I think that's what I see, and that's what I want to do more of. So yeah.
That is one of the positive of working in social care, that we give that interesting bug called sensory integration.
I think just thinking back to the preceptorship as well, for people who maybe don't know about that, you've talked about your own learning through through that journey and through learning about sensory integration and sensory strategies. And, you know, I wonder if you want to just tell us a little bit about how the preceptorship was developed and how that actually works in practice for the OTs across all the service lines that are involved in that.
Yeah. So in the year, I think, if my memory is right, 2018, me and another occupational therapist, we started this preceptorship idea because the reason we had number of referrals coming to us and asking for case consultation and asking for sensory assessments for the services, where sometimes we do have within Cygnet services with no clinical team on site. So the request would come to us, and at one point we thought, rather than we both, obviously, it is a mission impossible. We were not able to do it. It was taking most of our time away from our clinical time that we have, because we both had our own services that we were working, and at one point it became, as I said, a mission impossible. And we thought of, okay, we need to develop some training program where we give the skills and knowledge to occupational therapists within the company. So when we introduced in 2019, the intake was pretty much, the interest was around 5, I would say, the year when we started. And then it branched out where we had, I think, remember, Emma, we completed a survey of what training opportunities OTs would like within the company. And to my surprise, 63% of the OTs obviously voted for SI. So they wanted to be trained in sensory integration. And I think that's where the passion got ignited. And then we thought, okay, we need to put some effort into this preceptorship program. And then we developed a preceptorship booklet for OTs, sensory integration
I don't think we
preceptorship
realised
booklet.
at that point, did we, just how applicable it was in some of the service lines that we didn't naturally think of for sensory integration, and how much difference that could make if everyone could just have that baseline knowledge, did we?
Yeah, no. And then initially it was only from social care services, but then it was across all 11 service lines we had received referrals. But that shows how the approach is sort of widespread among all the service lines, including mental health, CAMS, day services, and LD services. So we had referrals across all the service lines. And then we started looking into more sort of, is there an evidence among all this client group that we have that we receive referrals from? And we had a wider understanding, and that's where we had to look at, is there a literature review there? Is there an evidence base around this? And also, SI had developed sort of far and above across all the service lines in terms of research as well. And that gave us more sort of solid evidence for us to develop the pathway. And then at one point in time, it became a job that we both can't do, so we had to develop mentors. And then obviously people went on to did their actual formal SI training, and they volunteered themselves to be mentors for the program. So it starts with someone interested in OT. They would send us an email. We have an advanced SI practitioners group, and then they would express their interest through email, and then we would find like who would be a suitable mentor for them, who works obviously in the same service line, but every time we don't get the time, it's somewhere like, a Scotland OT would be supervising an OT in England. So that's how we say it. And recently, and very sort of current intake of OTs we have is 17 in just this intake, which is one of the biggest intake that we have had so far since 2018.
Can you remember off the top of your head, because we've got it written down somewhere and I haven't refreshed myself on it either, how many people we've put through the preceptorship in total?
So if we could just have a rough idea of around even a minimum of 5 on each intake, we should have had at least 50 OTs on our SIP program. And then at least we have 5 OTs who go out to do their formal SI training.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's been so lovely just unpicking kind of what's going on in your heads and how you think about the residents and the service line and the OT provision within that. Is there anything else that you'd want to add before we bring it to a close? Is there anything that you'd want people listening to know about how you work within those services?
So I think one thing that I would like to mention is, again, working for social care is no 2 days are the same. And the other thing, what we forgot to mention about the work that we do around our audits, our intervention audits. And very recently, I know Catherine has introduced person-centered training for support workers.
Yeah, that's worked really well. So it's a focused training about our one resident, their history, what their likes and dislikes are, what their needs are, what their quirks are, really person-centered, holistic approach. And it's actually worked really, really well. And we'd like to roll it out across the whole of our services across the South Coast.
So is that using that sort of case formulation approach to
Yeah,
be
but
able
really
to...
informal, because obviously we're delivering to support workers and to chefs and to any other people that work in our services. So it's really informal about that person. But yeah, with the sort of case formulation sort of theory and head on, but we're pulling out all of the really key important information that for that person, and how can we give them the best support and the best quality of life.
So is that something to do as a QI
I
project
think
across
it
the
could
service
be.
line,
Yeah,
Sheba?
I could be. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Good thing, Emma, you reminded me about the QI projects. We do have different QI projects going on in social care, which are all person-centered, like how Catherine said. We've got a QI project called Activity Grab Sheets, where the focus is on the day services and now the activity grab sheets. That's again the OT is working along with the support staff. So working within social care is more sort of collaborative working with social care, with other clinical team members, with the managers, with the domestics, with the chef.
Everybody.
And everybody.
We're all one team. Yeah.
Yeah. And also because social care is just spread across England and Scotland. So all our OT processes do underpin national drivers and evidence-based practice. Like someone in England could be talking all about Mental Capacity Act, and someone in Scotland need to follow Adults with Incapacity Act. So for someone who's wanting to come and work for social care, they could work across any services from Scotland, England, Midlands, North, South, Northeast. So we do have services nationally.
And I think it's great, isn't it, that although those services are so geographically spread, as a service line and as a team, you do regularly get together, don't you, face to face, and you have those team meetings where you've got the training sessions, you look at your audits, you look at best practice, and you use that throughout the year to be able to keep on top of what your service development plan is and how you can all work together to achieve that, don't you?
All our service line meetings, it's just not having the service line meeting bi-monthly. I always say to OTs within social care, we are just a phone call away from people. We do have our email groups where, you send an email out, I need a risk assessment for so-and-so, and there you go, you get that many OTs responding to you. So it is that OT networking that we have within each service line, not just with social care, just across all these service line, which is a very positive thing of working for Cygnet, isn't it? So it is not lone practicing. It is not you've left sometimes you could be in your own sort of little zones thinking about what do I do? Where do I ask for support? I think you do have that support networking within each service line. And then coming to service line meeting is where you obviously come with the concept of, I need some support around this clinical query that I have for a resident, and I don't know what to do with this intervention and things like that. And there you go, you get all the heads working together there, and then obviously giving ideas and support. So it's that networking that we have within the service line. And within the service line meetings, we look at different things. Very recently, in our service line meetings, we had a discussion around audits that we complete for the service lines, and it's very specific now within social care. And we spoke about how are we going to frame the action plans from our intervention audits? How are we going to look at more explore research? How are we going to pull together the data? And then, all these things do inform our evidence-based
Absolutely.
practice.
And it links with our training, our person-centred training, because the intervention audits, are basically us evaluating our training to our support workers, and do they actually understand why they're doing the intervention that we're asked them to do? How are they doing it? How often are they doing it? How long are they doing it for? And that's come from the intervention audit. It's actually, if there's a hole in that sort of treatment program, a treatment plan, then we need to do more training. And that's where in the person-centred training that I've recently done, is about, that individual, why they have a weighted blanket, for example, or why they need certain thing when they're showering, or, why they need an environment that's quiet and calm. And one key word, so bath, or, the person's name and then bath, rather than it's now time to go for a bath and too much information. So, yeah, and that's come from the intervention audit. So, yeah, all the bigger picture is sort of all links together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm sure everyone's really enjoyed listening to all the things that you've got to say there. And, for people who maybe have never worked with that client group, it's great for them to hear what OT really looks like when that's the service that you're working in.
It's wonderful working in social care.
Such an amazing opportunity.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.